Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, where the rabbis at Congregation Avas Torah each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the Parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Chaim Pupko, and I am joined by my dear friends and teammates, Rabbi Daniel Goldberg
Shalom.
and Rabbi Morty Kisus.
Shalom.
If you'd like to sponsor an upcoming episode, please contact the shul. All right, here we go. Our one pasuk for this week from Parshas Eikev, from the very beginning of the Parsha, Perek Zayin, pasuk Yud Beis, chapter 7, verse 12. V'haya Eikev tishme'un es hamishpatim ha'ele, and if you obey these rules, Moshe begins his long soliloquy reviewing the mitzvos and the principles behind the mitzvos, and he begins by saying, if you obey the mitzvos, ushmartem v'asisem, and you make sure to observe them carefully, Ushmartem vasisem osam v'shamar Hashem Elokecha lecha es habris ve'es hachesed. Hashem will keep for you. He will maintain faithfully the covenant and the kindness Asher nishma lavosecha that He promised your forefathers. This essentially means that if you keep the Torah, then Hashem will keep His part of the covenant. This is Moshe's introduction to the mitzvos, clearly a foundational pasuk with much, much lying underneath the surface.
V'haya Eikev tishme'un. I'd like to begin by highlighting a linguistic irregularity. Rashi notes immediately that the word Eikev is a rather odd term. It's not generally used throughout the Torah. Why then does he go through the effort, Moshe Rabbeinu, to specifically convey this idea with the term Eikev? And Rashi explains that Eikev is similar to the term akavav, which is the heel of a person. Generally, there are mitzvot that naturally nobody would ever transgress. There are certain basic mitzvot that we have a understanding and an appreciation for. What Moshe was telling Bnei Israel is, V'haya Eikev tishme'un. If you listen to those mitzvot that are generally trampled upon by other people, by our Eikev, by our heels, then all these blessings are going to come about. So Rashi says, he reminds us that very often there are mitzvot that we don't take too seriously. And those mitzvot in specific are ones in which we have to take great care to perform those as well. This is a Rashi I remember hearing the year before I went to Israel. One of my rabbeim gave us a talk, and he said that you're going to go to Israel, you're going to find something very interesting. Fridays, nobody goes to yeshiva or kollel. Very often people learn through the night on Thursday nights, but then Friday, it's basically a day off. That is a classic form of Eikev, a mitzvah, an opportunity to study Torah on a Friday morning, and suddenly everybody's too busy preparing the entire day for Shabbat, which is not essentially the case. And therefore, take these types of mitzvot. The Da'at Sekenim Malei HaTosafot brings Rashi, and he has a beautiful mashal. He says the reason why this is so important is because often we don't necessarily appreciate the schar va'onesh. He quotes the famous Mishnah, Heve zahir b'mitzvah kala ki mitzvah hamuda. Why? Because we don't necessarily know what our reward is going to be for a major mitzvah or a minor mitzvah, if we can call it that. He gives a mashal. Imagine a king had to have an orchard planted, and he said, whoever comes and assists in planting the orchard, they're going to get money. Now, of course, he didn't say if you plant this tree, you're going to get that much money, that tree, the other amount of money, because he wanted to have a beautiful orchard, and he wanted to have a variety of all. And if we only focus on the mitzvot that we feel are important and we neglect the other mitzvot, essentially, it's going to be a lopsided form of service to God. And therefore, he reminds us, Moshe Rabbeinu, V'haya Eikev tishme'un, even the smaller mitzvot that we don't necessarily have that same level of appreciation for should be adhered to, kiba hamuda.
First of all, you remind me of the Mashgiach Ruchani in Yeshivat Keren B'Yavneh, Rabbi Rivlin, who gave us a Musar Shmuz at one point because just that there technically is a Friday morning Seder, even though there's no shiur, but nobody would go to the Friday morning Seder. People were going into Yerushalayim, people were playing flag football, and he would say to us, and he was Israeli, but his English was okay, but it was good enough that I can hear it, I can even hear it right now. Boys, Friday is not free day. When an Israeli can get a pun so well, it's impressive.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Yeah.
It's impressive.
Some of my like very sweetest, as I reflect on like a time gone by of just like a much less complicated life before Baruch Hashem, all of the obligations and responsibilities and all the bracha that comes with it. But when I think back to those years in yeshiva, Fridays stand out as this like really special time. We had a shir in the morning in Shalavim, and then there was like an incentive program that if you stayed and you learned for a few more hours, you'd get pizza for lunch. So I'd feel like $1,000,000. I'd sit in the base medrash. I always studied the Parsha on Friday mornings. That was like, for me, that was like healthy and balanced and normal. And then if it was like a long Friday, you'd go for like a big nap, and then you played ball, and you'd call home, and then you'd get ready for Shabbos, get to the base medrash like before, like really like benachas. You had no responsibilities. And you could sit and learn a little bit before the davening started. It was just like, it was like time out of time. It was just like, it's hard for me to even put myself in that headspace where like I could just, it was so luxurious and so benachas and rewarding and fun and positive. And like, to me, like if I want to put myself in like a good headspace of like a moment of like, like that was like me'ein olam haba in a certain way. Like I go to like Fridays in yeshiva in a certain way.
You reminded me that some of my best softball games were those Friday afternoon softball games when it's like, right, there's no schedule. There's no, you have just like that open free time.
A different time of life.
Oh.
So I'll dovetail with the very beautiful Rashi that you just referenced. The Rabbeinu B'chai has a different interpretation. So you already teed up. Eikev is a strange language. It's not something, it stands out and it draws attention to itself. It's also interesting, by the way, I'll just say parenthetically, the first pasuk of every parsha gets a lot of attention by the Mefarshim. A lot of attention, because that's where we start, and so any irregularity in a first pasuk in a parsha is going to be like a lightning rod. It's going to attract a lot of attention. So Eikev, a lot of ink is spilt on that word.
In fact, if you look at Sefaria, and I sometimes do this when I pick the pasuk for the podcast. So if you open up commentaries, there's a number in parentheses of how many commentaries there are on this pasuk.
Yeah.
And so I know if I come across a pasuk with like 10 commentaries, 15, it's like there's not going to be a lot to say on this. On Eikev, there's like over 140 commentaries on this pasuk.
Wow.
I think there's like a PhD to be written similarly about studying the statistics on Wayu Torah, right? Wayu Torah has hundreds of thousands of shiurim, but you can go topic by topic and you can see which parshios, which halachos, what are kind of, let's say if it's a pretty good sampling of modern Orthodox rabbis and educators, like what are we focusing on and what has like no shiurim? And it's like this great statistical analysis of like where our attention goes.
Yeah.
Apropos of the Dvar Torah with which you began, Rabbi Kisu, so Eikev, strange language, the idea that it's what we trample on with the bottoms of our feet. So Rabbeinu B'chai gives an additional pshat. It's not a contrarian take, but another layer, which is a more positive layer in a certain sense, is the mitzvos that we perform with our legs, with our feet. That those are mitzvos that are very special in a certain way. And he says, halvayas hames, escorting the dead to their final burial place, bikur cholim, going to batei midrashos, batei kinesios. These are special mitzvos because we use our legs with them. To me, that triggered in my mind a medrash, which I'm very fond of. It's from Vayikra Rabbah B'chukosai, and it draws our attention to a pasuk in Tehillim 119, where David HaMelech says, Chishavti derachai v'ashiva raglai el edosecha, which the medrash explains as follows. Chishavti derachai, every morning I have all sorts of plans for what I want to do and where I want to go and what I want to accomplish. V'ashiva raglai el edosecha, but my legs naturally take me to the batei kinesios and batei midrashos. Which is such a resonant idea. Like you wake up in the morning, hopefully you say Moda'ani, you're grateful, but then you start thinking, it floods in. What do I have to do today? What do I have to do this? I have to do that, and you get overwhelmed. But if you're habituated to going to shul, if you're habituated to doing those things that are important, but maybe not every day feel urgent, but if your legs are habituated, your legs will take you there. Every morning, no matter what's on my mind, Baruch Hashem, most mornings, my legs take me to shul, and I start my day the right way, because I'm habituated. And I was actually thinking maybe that actually explains the linguistic connection between regel and hergel. Hergel, right, that which is habitual, right, it's like your legs. You don't have to think about where you walk. Your legs carry you. They just do the work. You're not really thinking about it. So the idea that we build into our lives and into our schedules kind of like a muscle memory. And if you build into your just how you construct your life and your day, mitzvos and ma'asim tovim and chesed, your legs will take you there, and that'll do so much of the work. And it won't have to be a battle every day. It's just my legs take me there, and then I deal with my other stuff.
Tremendous thought.
Yeah, and to the degree that it's a habit, it then becomes something which frames or informs your day, and so that if it's missing, you can feel it's missing. I remember someone in Shul telling me specifically, somebody who gets up very early, davens, goes to the gym and showers, and then goes to work.
Yeah.
And he says if there's ever a morning in which he doesn't go to the gym and shower, he doesn't feel like himself.
Yeah.
And I always like to joke about it because I don't really go to the gym that often. But I'll say like, oh yeah, I can't. If I don't go to the gym, it's just like I just go back to bed.
That's a
Why
waste
even
of a
try?
day. Why
Yeah.
even try?
Why even try?
But when you make davening the beginning of your day, a product of that hergel is feeling its absence when it's not there.
True.
Yeah. I was actually looking at a Ramban, which also talks about the meaning of the word Eikev. And like the Rabbeinu Bechaye, which Rabbi Goldberg you cited, cites Rashi, doesn't necessarily argue with him, but goes in a different direction. The Ramban says that the word Eikev is the end, as opposed to the word Rosh, which is the beginning. He says we often use these words that are parts of the body to symbolize different things, like Rosh Hashanah, like the head of the year, the beginning. Eikev is the end. And what does it mean? What it means is V'haya Eikev Tishma'un, that if you observe the mitzvos, you will see their product, their reward at the end. And it doesn't just mean the end for the Ramban. It means an end after a long circuitous route. Like the word Eikev, the heel, when Esav says to Yaakov, "Vayakveni ze pa'amayim," right? You tricked me twice, because Eikev doesn't just mean heel; it means something that comes at the end in a roundabout way, not in a straightforward manner. And what the Ramban is saying is that on a communal level, the reward or the punishment that we get for whether we keep the bris, whether we keep the Torah, is something that we will be able to see eventually. We're not going to see it immediately. We're not going to be able to see cause and effect immediately. But when you look in hindsight at the point of Eikev, you'll see that how events transpired, what people did, communal decisions, you'll be able to see that Hashem shamar es habris. He kept his end of the covenant. And that's what it means, shamar, because Hashem has to hold on to it, as it were, for much time along that circuitous route until we arrive at the end. When we arrive at the end, Hashem will keep his promise. This resonated with me very clearly because we often talk about the theological question of why terrible things happen, the Holocaust and other painful things. And some people will say a little clumsily that it's because of the Holocaust that we got the state of Israel. It's not correct. That's not how it works. But I think that is a reflection of Eikev, right? You see a certain path in hindsight that following the destruction of fully 1/3 of our people, that ushered in a time in which we recognized how important it is that we have Jewish autonomy and that we can protect and defend ourselves. What's so beautiful is that I think that based on the Ramban, you can explain a little bit further the word chesed in the pasuk, right? V'shamar Hashem Elokecha lecha es habris ve'es hachesed, the covenant and the chesed. What's the chesed? What's the kindness? A bris, he owes us. It's a covenant. That's an agreement. No, but I believe the chesed is that Hashem will enable us to be able to see in hindsight his involvement in Jewish history. Hashem didn't necessarily have to allow us to be able to see. But the chesed is that Hashem will give us a window, will give us some perspective at some point, and that's a chesed. Because when you understand things, when you have clarity, it's much more grounding, it's much more settling. Like, for instance, when someone, God forbid, gets a diagnosis of some disease and they're given a treatment plan. So there's something reassuring in that plan that, like, they know what I know what I'm going to be doing. I know what the next few months, few years is going to look like. But if somebody gets a diagnosis and there's still some uncertainty and they're not sure if this is the exact diagnosis, they still have to do more tests, or they're not sure if this is the right treatment, that uncertainty is unsettling in and of itself. So having that clarity of understanding is a chesed. And I think it's something that our generation uniquely has been blessed with, to see the trajectory of so many terrible things that we've been through, and that we're now at a place in which we're turning a corner, as it were. We're able to defend ourselves, and it's still very difficult. There are still things that we don't understand, but we know there's a certain confidence, a certain emunah and bitachon that emerges from this pasuk, that there will come a time when we'll be able to understand. We won't be able to answer every question, but at least we'll have that understanding.
That's very, very beautiful and very resonant. And I think you really drew out the reflection of the Ramban so beautifully. It reminds me of Yaakov at the end of his life. Yaakov has this very, very challenging life. And when Paro asks him, how old are you? He says, so and so many years, and they've been ra'im, ume'atim, right? Didn't live up to my forefathers. They have been difficult and challenging. But then, later on, as he has his grandchildren on his lap, he says, Hamalach ha'goel osi mikol ra, yivarech es ha'ne'arim. He suddenly, as he can kind of see the future and is reflecting on his life with maybe a little bit more perspective, he can say, the angel that saved me from all bad, right? It was a moment where all of the tumultuous twists and turns of his life clarified for him, and he was able to say, like, hey, look, the big picture here, I see it now, and I've had this angel who's protected me from all bad. It's a remarkable reflection from someone with such a challenging life, such a circuitous journey.
Exactly, and it's perfect.
It's an Eikev moment.
Exactly, and that's and the Ramban is hinting to that when he cites V'yakveni zepamayim. He's hinting to the fact that that's what Yaakov represents in his very character, that he is the one who represents someone who has to fight for everything he gets, who has to overcome enormous obstacles and challenges. Bikesh leishev b'shalva. At a certain point, he thought it was done, and then kafza alav rogzo shel Yosef, and then he had to deal with the whole thing with Yosef. So you see that that's exactly what Yaakov represents.
Beautiful.
Shkoyach. Thank you all so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed. If you're interested in sponsoring a future episode, please reach out to one of us. And of course, please send us your feedback. Shabbat Shalom and Good Shabbos from the One Pasuk Podcast.